All right, so Dan Ward, deductive survey outline read in 3 minutes or perhaps even less. Topic, responsible leadership requires obedience. We're going to look at scripture from Samuel, Exodus, Numbers, and Matthew. The focus statement is that submission creates the opportunity to follow a greater kingdom plan. And the function statement we're driving towards at the end is that I'm going to encourage people to place themselves in a position that makes them depend on God rather than their own strengths, and then to make time to listen, to hear what God has to say. So, the one point is, prior to that, we're going to start with questions, garner some engagement, hopefully. I'm going to ask people, how many leaders do we have in the room? How many people here self-identify as followers? Let me ask you a bigger question. Is it better to lead or to follow? Who is the greatest leader of all time? What about the greatest follower? And did any of you put the same person in both those categories? The one point that we're driving towards here is that the Bible teaches us that responsible leadership requires obedience. That's fairly counterintuitive, but really, it's true. What happens when someone, especially a leader, follows their own desires rather than looking to that higher authority that's been placed over them? Let's take a look in Scripture and find out what we see. Now we're going to read excerpts from 1 Samuel chapter 13, verses 5 through 14. This is the story of Saul. He's amassed an army to fight the Philistines, but while he's waiting for Samuel to show up and conduct the offering, Samuel's late. Saul panics as his people start to dissolve and flee. They're really looking to their leader to step up and lead, so he does. He conducts the sacrifice himself, and of course Samuel comes back, condemns that. God is very upset. He loses his leadership. It's a disaster. From there, we're going to go to a story of Moses. We're going to look at Exodus 16, verses 2 through 3, and Numbers 11, verses 10 through 15. I realize I'm splicing some scriptures there, but I still think the point that I'm tying together is valid, so I think we're going to be okay. Clearly, Moses faced a lot of grumbling and complaining from his people. They're looking to him to lead. And apparently, his leadership is so ineffective, or their faith is so tiny, that they'd rather go back to slavery in Egypt, where at least they had something to eat. Moses reacts with great truculence. Even reminds me kind of my own teenage son a few years ago, saying, well, if this is you, you're going to treat me. Why don't you just kill me now? I didn't ask to lead these people. So he's not perfect. He's a little maybe low on faith himself. But what does he do with his fears, his concerns, his tensions, all of this discomfort? Well, he takes them to the Father, and he listens. He takes direction. He follows. And as a result, he leads his people where they need to go, and he's respected throughout time as one of the greatest leaders ever. And then finally, one more example, one more great religious leader facing challenges, circumstances with followers who lack sufficient faith, and enormous stakes riding on the outcome. We're going to look at Matthew 26, verses 14 through 46. Again, I won't be able to read all these, but kind of touch on the story that Jesus is anointed. Judas agrees to betray him. He has Passover dinner with his disciples. So there's just some incredible intimacy in this story. They begin to make the walk towards the Garden of Gethsemane. Jesus tells all of his disciples that they're all going to abandon him. Of course, they all say they're not. Peter throws everybody else under the bus and says, well, maybe those people won't, but I sure as heck. Or maybe those people will abandon you, but I sure as heck never will. Jesus calls Peter out. They get to the Garden of Gethsemane. He calls Peter and John and James to him and asks them, of course, to wait and watch and pray while Jesus is doing his thing. And they fall asleep. And so 3 times Jesus asks them to watch and to pray. 3 times he goes to the Father and pleads for his burden, his cup to be removed from him. And it's very common for us to assume that he's anticipating his own pain, his own struggles, his own agony, that he's encountering some fear there based on what's going to happen to him. But I'm going to forward the idea that Jesus is also facing some incredible tension because the people he's leading, the people he's about to turn this whole mission over to, the people that are going to carry the faith forward after he dies on the cross, are brutally, woefully inadequate. So some of the pain and fear that he's feeling, and one motivation for him asking for that cup to be passed, is so that he can stay and continue to lead. But when the Father says no, Jesus follows and does what he's supposed to do. And as a result, of course, everything turns out wonderfully. Humanity is saved for all eternity. I'm going to close then with asking a few more questions and giving one direction. I'm going to ask people where God is inviting them into a deeper faith through obedience. I'm going to ask people to consider where God might be asking them to follow so that then they can lead or follow as part of their leadership process. And then finally, I'm going to encourage people to place themselves in a position where they are forced to rely on God. Tackle something that's big, so you're forced to rely on God rather than your own strength, and then make time to listen and hear what God has to say.